Hello. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon or good evening, depending on your location from which you're joining us. It's a few minutes after 12 p.m. So where I am in Philadelphia. So we will begin in respect of, for everyone's time. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Senya Nouriel, and I'm a lecturer in the Russian and East European Studies Department at the University of Pennsylvania and the Jensen Bryan Curator at the Print Center, a nonprofit art institution here in Philadelphia. On behalf of the department, I would like to welcome you to this virtual panel discussion, Queer Art and Censorship in Russia. I'm so glad to see all of you here. So many familiar names, familiar faces from all over the world. So thank you so much for taking the time and joining us today. In the wake of recent violence and censorship against LGBTQAI+ identifying individuals in Russia, this panel brings together leading voices from the queer art and culture community, both in the country and the diaspora. It aims to examine the state censorship around queerness in Russia today and its effects on art and culture. The entire program is scheduled to last approximately 1 hour. Each of the 3 speakers will present for approximately 10 minutes. They will be followed by a 15-minute or so moderated discussion by Ksenia M. Soboleva, who will then open the discussion to questions from the audience. As you can see, everyone except the panelists are muted. Please remain muted for the duration of the program. You can submit your questions to us at any point by writing them in the chat. I will monitor the chat and compile your questions. We will aim to answer as many of your questions as possible. Some community guidelines that I hope you will respect. This is a safe space. Please help us ensure this safe space by keeping your conversations and questions respectful and connected to the program topic. Participants with repeated comments that are disruptive or off topic, or anyone who harasses anyone will be muted, will have their comments deleted, and may be potentially kicked out. So on that note, I'd like us all to welcome our panelists today. I'll give them very, very short biographies. Their biographies are much longer, and I encourage you to look them up and read further at your own time and leisure. So our 3 speakers today are Yevgeny Fix, a Moscow-born, New York City-based artist whose projects address Soviet-era queerness. He is the co-editor of a forthcoming book entitled Queering Russian Art, Realism, Revolution, Performance, which is co-edited by Fix, Brian James Baer, and Catherine Carl. We have Sasha Kazantseva, a St. Petersburg-based lesbian and queer blogger and journalist, a trans ally and author of How to Write About Transgender Issues in Russia, a guide for journalists. Sasha is co-founder of Ozine, the Russian queer media outlet. And last, we have German Levrovsky, a Moscow-based artist whose project Reborn builds and documents using a variety of media the relationship with a reborn doll, a 3D printed post-human baby. They are joined today by Ksenia Soboleva, Maya Choska, for those who's here. Ksenia is a New York-based writer and art historian specializing in queer art and culture. She is the 2020-2021 Vilcek Curatorial Fellow at the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum in New York City. So without further ado, welcome again. And I turn it over to our first presenter, Yevgeny Fix. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ksenia. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and nice to meet Sasha and German and Ksenia Soboleva. So let me share my screen. I would like to show everyone a new project of mine, or a project that is work in progress. A project is called Soviet Union, July 1991. And the project is about a gay and lesbian conference that took place in Leningrad and Moscow in July 1991, a few weeks before the Soviet Union collapsed. So in July 1991, a group of 70 gay and lesbian activists, mostly from the US, came to Leningrad and Moscow and worked with Soviet gays and lesbians to organize a conference. And it was one of the first gay and lesbian event in the history of the Soviet Union, and probably the first largest event of that sort. So 70 Western activists, mostly Americans, were, creme de la creme of American gay and lesbian movements of the time. And the group included one of the founders of American gay and lesbian movement, Harry Hay, which you can see here in the picture. So my project is based on historical footage of this conference. So I have about 20 hours of video of this conference, and I'm turning it into a multimedia exhibition, which I'm planning to present in 2021, 2022. So the project will consist of video, text, performative, reenactment elements, objects, also paintings. So there will be quite a few pieces. But it's all revolves around this footage of this conference. So Harry Hay was among the attendees. So he came to Moscow at the age of 79 with his partner, John. And in a way, my project, I've done several projects about Harry Hay. So his Moscow connection is super important to me. So I'm opening this presentation with a bunch of images of Harry Hay, goofing around and enjoying himself in downtown Moscow. So him on Red Square. So Harry Hay, I guess for folks in Russia, so Harry Hay was a founding figure of American gay and lesbian movement who came from the communist movement and founded one of the first gay rights groups in the US, the Matashin Society, in the 50s. But remained Marxist and identified as a Marxist till the end of his life. So the video, so as I mentioned, it's 20 hours of footage. And what it really reveals, it reveals a lot of contradictory messages. And one of the messages would be utopia and perestroika's utopia, perhaps as utopia of sexual and gender nonconformism. So perestroika's utopia, you can see it very clearly in many of the images. When gay activists, passing condoms to folks in downtown Moscow. It's a utopia in the sense that it feels like there is no Western notion of homophobia yet in the late Soviet landscape. At least it's not the homophobia as we understand it now. So it's kind of, it shows Moscow and Leningrad as the space of possibilities, of really open space, a utopian space. You see presentations of kissings and protests in front of the mayor's office. in Moscow with no police presence, with no even attempts to restrict or to suppress. So this is all across the street from the mayor's office, next to Yuri Dolgorukiy monument. So the big issue in 91, of course, was decriminalization of male homosexuality. So a lot of posters against Article 121 of the Soviet Criminal Code criminalizing male homosexuality. So the conference was taking place while Article 121 was still in effect. And among the things that gay and lesbian activists, among the things that they did, they visited prisons where folks sentenced under Article 121 were still held at the time. So you can see these images of folks approaching, activists approaching, prison guards and trying to strike a conversation. And amazing thing is that it still kind of falls under the utopian umbrella. I feel this type of approach, knock on the prison's door and try to talk to prison guards, officer in charge. So there is something to it. So this is American activist Julie Dorff trying to talk to some prison guards outside of prison. So this is American-Russian journalist, writer Masha Gessen, also trying to talk to folks. So one of the issues, perestroika as utopia, as open space, late perestroika, late Soviet Union. Some of the other issues would be certain exoticization of Soviet gays and lesbians. You can trace certain signs of imperialism, American imperialism in certain things that you see and you hear on the screen. You can also see a very interesting division among American gay and lesbian activists. You can see that activists are mostly middle class, that they're mostly white, and you can see kind of ideological and political split among American gay and lesbian activists. So this video is very much kind of an anthropological portrait of the state of American gay and lesbian activism circa 1991. And this is a beautiful shot. You see, so this is in front of the Bolshoi Theater. It's one of the protests that they organized, where they protested Article 121. And these were on the stairs of the Bolshoi Theater. And the guy with the mic is Roman Kalinin, the first openly gay Soviet.
2 minutes, Zhenya.
Absolutely. So the question of communism and anti-communism was very, very prominent. And this is probably my favorite still from this footage where you have Roman Kalinin, the first openly gay Soviet, and next to one of the key figures of the early late Soviet gay and lesbian movement in the Soviet Union, and next to Harry Hay, and Harry Hay being Marxist and Roman Kalinin being hardcore anti-communist in one space. So it's a quite kind of, to me, evocative image of kind of transformation and the American-Soviet connection. And I think I will leave with this open mic, this kind of open mic, open possibility, and maybe read a very short quote from one of the activists, left-wing American lesbian activists who came to the conference, and I have yet to find her name. So she says, why we tell Russian activists that capitalism is the answer? This is American imperialism, pure and simple, and taking advantage of the impoverished segment of our community here in Russia. We are different. We American gay and lesbian activists are different, even among ourselves in our group. Some are left-wing, some are right-wing. We are scared for Russians after we leave. But social change doesn't happen without risks. I don't think it's that dangerous to be gay here. We can't be responsible for what happens here after we leave. We are guests here at the critical junction in the life of this country. Let's not be patronizing Americans and tell Russians what they should do. If they want to come out, fine. If not, also fine. We must support their decision. If you see capitalism approaching and jumping you, blow your whistle, repeal Article 121. So I'll stop here.
Thank you, Zhenya. Thank you so much. Wonderful. Our next presenter, Sasha.
Hello. Thank you for inviting me. I'm really happy to be a part of this event. My name is Sasha. I'm a queer sex educator in a country which has no sex education formally, and also I'm a co-founder of OZIN, the media about queer culture in Russia. And also formally, we don't have queer people in our country. They're just invisible, don't exist. So I'm working with invisible topics. And today I'm going to tell you about the phenomena that we call Russian queer culture. The rapid development of, Russian queer revolution, the rapid development of Russian queer culture that we see in recent years. So let me start the presentation. Moment. The screen. So, I'm gonna speak from the perspective of our work and show you some projects that we do. What is OZIN? OZIN is a platform where we strive to provide a positive view of Russian LGBTQ+ people so that queer people could see each other, could see great things that other queer people in Russia do, could feel safer, could feel supported, could feel inspiration and feel empowerment. In Russia, we have a long history of homophobia and transphobia, and we still live in a country of homophobia and transphobia, and we live under discriminative laws. I think you know about them. But at the same time, nowadays we see more and more people, queer people, especially from younger generation, who choose to be more open, who choose to be vocal about who they are, about themselves. And it's about positive tendency, positive change. So, why doesn't it work?
Click on it.
Oh, yes, I got it. I created my blog about a lesbian and the queer sex education and lifestyle 3 years ago, just because I can't find such a blog in Russian, which I could read myself. And we created OZIN, with my colleague Dima. It was his idea 2 years ago, and I think we were very well timed because it was very beginning of this new wave in Russian queer culture. And on the one hand, Azin became like a response for the new request for open talk about queerness in Russian. And on the other hand, Azin became a platform for this talk and became one of catalysts for this talk. Now I'm going to show you some projects so that you can see like faces of Russian queer community and get familiar with our work. The first one, why it doesn't work? Oh, it works. Sorry. The first one is a project like our visit card within our photo project, Queer Creators of Russia, portraits of Russian queer artists, queer activists, and visually we play with like popular stereotypes of Russian culture, like, you know, babushka, balalaika, traditional dresses, Orthodox architecture. And there are photos and also there are interviews of people. And sorry, I don't know why doesn't it work with my presentation. Oh, yes. And there are about 17 or 18 people participated, and you can check their interviews. They're available in English. All the projects I'm going to tell you about are available in English, and I think you're going to get the links after the call is finished. And these interviews, I find it rather representative because these people, they tell about how do they feel being queer persons in modern Russia, what challenges do they face as queer persons. And I find these interviews rather illustrative. So it's a project about public life, and now it's going to be a project about personal life. It's a project that I produced myself with my fellow photographer, stories and portraits of lesbian queer couples of St. Petersburg, the city where I live, and very personal stories very personal stories from different women of different backgrounds, different lifestyles, transgender, cisgender, and they shared their stories of how do they feel being in homosexual female relationships in Russia, where they have to hide their love, have to hide their feelings. And I really love this project. Also, we produce video projects, and you also can check them. There are a big project about coming out in Russian families available, and also short videos about vulnerability of Russian LGBTQ+ people and about equality. A big game changer that we managed to do this year, and that we're really proud about, the first Russian Digital Pride. It was a game changer because in Russia we never have such things as like a regular prides, like all these pride festivals that we can see in Europe, we can see in US. So the online format, the main format of this year, helped us a lot. We invited different artists, musicians, activists, influencers to participate, to make their performances, to share their supportive words with queer community. And surprisingly, this year, we got much more support than we expected. It was a total surprise. Like thousands and thousands of people shared our content. Popular independent media covered our pride, and even Russian celebrities, they shared our content, like people with millions of followers on Instagram. And it was something absolutely unimaginable, like 1 year ago, 2 years ago, because, for example, Russian celebrities just ignore the topic of queerness because it's something very marginalized. And we were like, wow, what's going on? What's happening? And I see it as a good marker of this positive change that we observe right now. And Also, important part of our work, we strive to collaborate with international media to create content in English, and because we realize that to stay in contact with international community, we need to do it, and we are very thankful to great journalists who help us. Here, Refinery, ID, and Calva Journal, very nice media about Eastern Europe culture. They helped us a lot. And this year, Ozin was nominated to Days 100. Probably you know this nomination for our contribution in culture. And we're really proud of it. And the last part of our work I would like to tell you about, it's not about pictures, but it's about language. It's especially important for me because I really love working with language and I do it a lot. So two fields of life which are very marginalized in Russia, it's sex and queerness. And because of this marginalization, we have a great lack of proper language to talk about these topics. We have lack of lexics, or we have some offensive words. So me and my colleagues and other activists always strive to create and develop new language for talking about sex, about queerness. And we strive to promote these new norms, new standards to popular media who are ready to support us. And me and my colleagues, we consult, for example, independent Russian media on how to cover queer people, queer issues in correct way, in ethical way. Also, I work a lot and collaborate a lot with transgender people and with transgender organizations of Russia. And I find it very important because as many countries, we have transgender people, maybe the most vulnerable group within LGBTQ plus identities. And this year I wrote and we released with a major transgender organization of Russia that guide on how to write about transgender in Russian for media, for journalists, for editors, for writers. And I'm really proud to be the part of this work. And I know that many friendly professionals, they started to use this guide. And because language is something that I consider determine how our attitude to things, I find this work really important. And to finish.
A little bit less than 2 minutes.
Okay, so I'm finished now. The last thing I would like to finish with, despite of all these positive changes I told you about, we still daily live under risks of being attacked or being arrested. And here are some arts that you can see. It's pictures who made the young Russian feminist and queer activist Julia Tsvetkova, and she's arrested right now for these pictures, and they want to sentence her for 6 years in prison for these pictures because they consider it being like propaganda and pornography. And it's absurd, it's total absurd because you can see it's like nice, naive images of women, and there are some short phrases in Russian like women can have periods, women can have fight, women can have wrinkles, like this. And it's a terrible situation, and now we have a big campaign against this arrest of Julia Tsvetkova, and it lasts for more than 1 year, but she's still arrested now, and nobody knows how it's gonna finish. So it's kind of a sad facet. These risks are kind of a sad facet of our work. But at the same time, it can't prevent us from doing what we do. So that's the story. Thank you so much for listening. That's it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sasha. And last but not least, we have German Lavrovsky.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being with us. Today I'm going to tell you about my project Reborn. And 1 second. I made a presentation for you, which is days.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. I think we lost Get Off.
What happened?
Oh no. Well, then this does give me an opportunity to give everyone Sasha's links, perhaps while he rejoins us.
He did share his presentation.
He did.
In the chat.
Well, that's good. Great.
So you can see and hear me, yeah?
Now we can see and hear you.
Wait, Geta, you disappeared.
Oh,
Here, yeah.
But now am I?
You're stable, yes.
You're back.
That's great. So the question when I started the project, so this is the link, I put it in the chat. There is also a bonus mixtape, Gestation Commune, so you can enjoy the sound while reading my presentation. So the first question was, who is a child today and what is it for? And I have two amazing examples of a child as a political agent, and one example is for the creating future and the other is for preserving the future. So in Soviet times, there was the symbol of a child acted as an opposing force to the bourgeois system. When it was the revolution of Soviet Union, new politics, and a quiet boy from Ural region, Pavlik Morozov, was instantly turned into a pioneer who denounced his father and grandfather in the name of the revolution and politics and contrary to the family values. So the opposite example we can see from the book by Lee Edelman, No Future, where he sees a child as a tool for preserving the present and introduces the term retro reproduction. The fascist face of the child covers up the laws of the nuclear family, which bans any mutation in reproduction. I think that this concept is very similar to what's happening right now in Russia. So we have the law on the ban on propaganda of non-traditional sexual relations among minors in Russia, which according to the authors is undermining the security of Russian society and the state and threatens the territorial integrity of the Russian Federation. So these politics, they exclude the LGBT community, the discourse, and for me, what's more important, the queer children, the teens with non-traditional sexual orientation. So they became kind of a weapon which can destabilize the country and its population. So I would call such a law a political pedophilia, which exposes queer children and their identity to violence by the government propaganda of traditional relationships, perverting them with patriarchal ideas about the world. I would love to quote Presiada: the gender police supervised the cradle of the living beings about to be born, to transform them into heterosexual children. So in such a context, any child is a queer child for me. The Project Reborn is an art research laboratory made to practice alternative ways of caring, reproduction, hospitality through the deconstruction of the concepts of child and family. My research is based around the people who take care of reborn dolls, which look like completely like a human baby. And I would say, like, choose your perfect baby and get the status of a parent. The preferable silicone softness, color, or maybe some modifications like a mermaid tail. So it's a perfect baby. It never cries, but it serves for the pleasure and satisfaction of a parent. Baby as a masturbator, I would call it. So such an artifact seemed me like an interesting tool to hack the family code. So in my project, Reborn is modified. It is 3D printed, and it no longer looks like a human baby, but a queer child. It was developed in a digital incubator, 3D printed. Reborn is a nomad-based, action-based object made to practice radical hospitality, alternative way of caring and reproduction, and it's kind of a try to make an apparatus for queer kinship. So here you can see the video of me unpacking of Reborn. I'm kind of, my project is also mimicking this form of blogging about Reborn dolls. So this is the unpacking, and this is how my Reborn queer child looks like. So it was important to for me to create an environment where Reborn lives when he gets its formations. So I turned to the work of Russian theorist and activist, cyber-feminist Irina Aristarchova, The Hospitality of the Matrix. Irina explores their basic philosophical concepts of the matrix, and she deconstructed, and thus she creates a new meaning for the matrix as an exact hospitable space that allows and provides formation. So for in the project Reborn, this formation is the kindergarten, international solidarity, founded by Vera Schmidt in USSR in 1921. This is a very inspirational place for me and for Reborn, because it's the 1920, the spirit of that revolutionary atmosphere. So this kindergarten children there were free from the totalitarian regime. They were free to investigate their sexuality, body. There were no punishments, and etc. And now one of the teachers there was Sabina Spielrein. She's a Russian psychoanalyst, and she's the student of Carl Jung. And I really love her work, Destruction as the Cause of Coming into Being. She devoted it to the idea of becoming through the deconstruction of normativity. And she considered identity as a multitude. A quote, "During reproduction, the union of cells occurs. Thus, the unity of each cell is destroyed, and a new life arises from the product of the destruction." It was her work was written in 1912. Oh yeah. So my project takes different places and events, and one of the main I would love to share is the Reborn document. This is kind of homage to Vera Schmidt, Mother's Diary, and Mary Kelly postpartum document. It is when Reborn travels and spend time with people for a week or like for a while, and they share their experience in a collective Google document. And such practice can help us to see how we understand and feel the ideas of mothering, the child, and care in the terms of queer family. It's also a try to build that, ecosystem of knowledge sharing. Also, I don't have a time, but I would share with you a game with Reborn I made in St. Petersburg. It is published on Garage Digital platform, and here it's a game based on some aspects of psychodrama, where I and my colleagues, people who are in the philosophers and activists as well, Russian, we tried to explore what is Reborn. So please follow also the link and see the video. I think I finished my presentation. Is that okay?
Excellent.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Everyone, yeah, Geta, you can stop sharing your screen.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you so much. I continue to be in awe of the three of you and all the work that you do. And I am so grateful to have this platform and to have this conversation. And thank you to you, Pen, and thank you to Ksenia, my tioska. So I think the brilliant thing of putting the three of you together is that there is this interplay of temporalities. Zhenya, your presentation focused on Russia's queer past, Sasha, Russia's queer present, and Gera, the potential for a queer future, right? And so all three of you, to a certain extent, engaged in very extensive research on the queer threads in Russian history, and Zhenya, you in particular. So my first question would be, how do you navigate working with a history that has been so purposefully censored, hidden, erased, and whatnot?
Thank you, Ksenia. I think I would maybe rephrase it slightly, because I see it as I see Soviet or Russian a history of sexual and gender nonconformism or dissent. It's so it's always been there, but it remains often unnamed or unacknowledged, or kind of unarticulated, while laying in plain sight, right? So I think this idea of Russian and Soviet gay history or queer history, or history of gender dissent, laying in plain sight, I think it's very important, because I remember when I was doing an earlier project of mine called Moscow, which is documenting gay sites in public places in Moscow. I remember my sister-in-law, who used to work in downtown Moscow, she was asking, why are you doing this project? It's not that interesting. I mean, everybody knew, right? So this idea that everybody knew where people are, where queer people are in Moscow, right? So it's a quite a common belief, but the question is, to acknowledge that something that everybody knew, right? And name it, right? And kind of approach it with the dignity that it deserves, right? So this is, I guess, my project, right? So I'm not so much into very deep archival research, right? But, I work with archival materials, but I think it's about really kind of giving due to what was there and many people knew.
Gera and Sasha, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I really love collecting stories of older LGBTQ plus people, and I strive to do it. And right now I'm planning a project about older generation of transgender people, like who lived in USSR and a bit later, because queer people are invisible, and transgender people is a group of people who are especially invisible within queer community. And I want to preserve their stories, to preserve this part of history, because I knew some great stories when people like how they find hormonal therapy illegally, how they tried to seek each other when there were no internet. So I think that talking to each other and trying to document these stories, it's right now an instrument how we can preserve this part of invisible history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Gera?
Well, how do I navigate? I think, first of all, that it's important to find these pieces from the Russian history. So, people are not going to think that all this, queer stuff is coming from USA, but that we also have really a lot of stuff in our history. And for me personally, it's important to make this context alive. So maybe like future generation can build works on it. And because the universities and official, they don't give this platform the background, a lot of background about Russia. I think Ksenia, who is a professor, a researcher in unofficial art of USSR, it's also a very hidden part that very important nowadays because of its critical aspects.
Excellent. Let me just ask one more question before we open it up to the audience, and then I can always circle back because I have many more questions. But I'm wondering whether you feel that this term queer has been more embraced in Russian because then, for example, gay and lesbian, because it has a tendency to, move away from sexual identity and disguise as theory. And so Gera, for example, your project at the garage, it's mentioned in the press release that it's queer. And I just wonder, have you experienced any censorship around that? Or is it that, queer has become quite trendy in Russia as well, but it's not necessarily attached to a sexual identity?
I can tell that the Garage Museum is one of the places that didn't put any censorship on my project, and I'm very grateful to them. I think it's really nice, but I think still the term queer is people still afraid. For me personally, I use queer to generalize the different communities, but it's still very, especially when I'm speaking about family values, people really afraid, and I don't know what to do with that. with that.
And Sasha, what are your thoughts on that?
I really love this term queer in Russia, and I observe how it lives its life in Russian language. Because in Ozin, I know that in Ozin we made some part of this work of implementing this term in Russian language, and it became popular due to our work as well. I think I think using queer, it have some sense in like it can maybe some safer word in some sense than LGBTQ plus, because it's people don't have such like triggered reaction for it. So I really love it, but I know that it's a very controversial term, and not all LGBTQ plus people really like it at the moment as a synonym of all non-straight identities. So it's a process.
I also have a thought that the modern theory, we have queer, post-human, and other a lot of concepts, and queer is in my research, it's not only about LGBT people, but it's also about new family. So for me, queer, it's kind of a very generalized word for everything, but I'm not sure that it's correct.
I'm going to jump in here because there have been a lot of really great questions that I've been compiling while you've all been talking. And a few of them, let's address the couple that have come in about vocabulary since we're on the topic. So first of all, lots of great feedback from the audience. Great job, panelists. Everyone loves your work, loves your blog, Sasha. And so one panelist, I'm going to try to combine these questions. So one panelist noted that you use a lot of words borrowed from English in talking about sex practices. So how do you go about borrowing that language from American discourse and integrating it into Russian context that's accessible and relatable to Russian audiences? I feel that question kind of stems from what Ksenia sort of talked about around queerness. And this most recent question kind of came in again for Sasha, but I think open for all since you're using a lot of the same vocabulary. If you could just name any vocabulary terms you have developed on your own for the LGBTQAI plus community in Russia.
Okay, sorry, could you remind the first one?
Okay, the first one is how do you translate from English to Russian in ways that make sense for Russia? And then the second one is what have you made up on your own to deal with the situation?
Okay, if we are talking about sex language, I use a lot of transliteration of nouns. And at the same time, I realize that we have great lack of verbs because in Russian language, if you are familiar with Russian language, it's much easier to transliterate nouns, but much harder to transliterate verbs. So for verbs, I have to find analogies, but with nouns, transliteration generally works. But for example, if I transliterate, for example, grinding or rubbing as a sex practice, I need to write an article, for example, in popular media, explaining what does it mean. Then that term begins its life in informational space, and people can get familiar with it, and that's how it works. Basically, it's about sex terms. About queer terms, the same. We just start to use it and use it and use it, and make some work about explanation. And in some moments, we mention that people start to use it and use it in blogs, and then use it in popular media, and we understand that the process has begun.
Great, Sasha. Wonderful. Well, I have a lot of questions coming in for Zhenya, Yevgeny, Fix. So let's turn a little bit to those for a moment. Let's see, there are quite a few. So some people are asking, Zhenya, well, one, could you just talk a little bit more about your forthcoming book that was cited in your biography?
Sure. So the book, initially the title was supposed to be Pleshkas of Russian Art, kind of cruising grounds of Russian art history. But now it has a slightly extended title, Queering Russian Art, Revolution, Performance, Realism, Revolution, Performance. And it's a collected volume, and we've been working on it for a very long time. I want to say 5 years. We are getting close. So it's going to be a collected volume containing 18 articles, 18. Mostly written specifically for this collected volume. A couple of articles appeared as chapters in some other publications in Russian before. And it covers mostly 20th century with one or two texts covering a little bit the 19th century, and then one text covering this current century. So so I'm really looking forward to it. So there are some amazing texts there. There is a text by Sera Fialetovai about Russian art activism of the first decade of 21st century, and some amazing texts by Olga Хорошилова, Gleb Napriyenko, and many other people.
Awesome. I can't wait until it's published. I've been hearing a lot about it over the years, so I'm very excited. And this panel is a nice way to kind of introduce it to people. We'd love to gather again, maybe when the book is published. So a couple more questions for you, kind of thinking about LGBTQA plus experiences over the decades. So we have one question coming in that the respondent is very interested in your reflections on the political and temporal openness in the early 1990s for imagining other utopian futures. The question is, how is it possible to relocate that sense of creative potential, or is it completely conjunction dependent and lost on us now today? So could you reflect on that?
Yes, I think a lot of it is lost. I think, amazing things that happened in the 90s, globalization and kind of the sense of global gay and lesbian liberation, the sense that it's a global project. I think it had some wonderful results, and then it had some not so wonderful results. For example, a notion of kind of contemporary Western homophobia that exists in Western societies now, and and all over the world. I think homophobia that folks experiencing in Russia now is quite different from homophobia that existed in late 80s. And so I think homophobia that, at least that's how I can see it here from New York, homophobia in Russia, it feels more state homophobia, right, than social homophobia. I think it's different. So I'm not sure if it's possible to recapture that utopian sense of late 80s.
And then speaking about kind of differences and definitions, someone would like you to expand upon what the difference between homophobia and the anti-sodomy law was that criminalized and jailed a lot of gay men in the USSR. When you said that there was no homophobia in the USSR, that is, it being a Western concept, does it mean that criminalizing laws were maintained without homophobic tendencies shared by a broader public?
Yes, well, I'm not sure. I think I'm not sure if I can properly answer it, because I think it's probably, I think Alexander Kondakov, I think would be able to really kind of get to the core of it. But I think what I think is different is that homophobia as a political the way I see it, definitely was present at the time of recriminalization of male homosexuality in the Soviet Union in 33, 34. So it was a political project, right? So it was a project of suppressing dissent, political dissent, sexual dissent, gender dissent, and so on. In the late 80s, I don't think it was a political project. It was, the law was on the books. It was applied when it was applied, not always, but when it was applied, it was not applied as a political tool, right? But I think what happened more recently, the last 7 years or so, then homophobia, state homophobia came back, right? In Russia. While at the same time, social homophobia, I think, is decreasing.
Mm.
So I think there is a disjunction between social and political homophobia right now.
Sasha and Geta, would you like to respond to that as well, or?
I agree with Evgeny.
Okay.
Okay, at the same time, I would like to say that I see, I'm not a sociologist, I'm not political scientist, but I see global processes of inclusion of of inclusion of became more. Sorry, I get nervous.
You're good. Don't worry. We're all friends here.
Oh, thank you so much. So I sure that we have some global positive process, and it's inevitable to take place in Russia. The process of became more inclusive and more friendly for each other. And I believe and I hope that we'll see like more tolerant society in upcoming years, and in Russia as well, even though right now we haven't so nice like conditions to live in.
Well, that's very hopeful, Sasha. And I think Gera's project is a really great way to think about kind of hope and the future. I mean, you know, this panel was purposely planned by Ksenia Soboleva and me to sort of kind of touch upon sort of a past, present, and future of the state of queerness and queer issues in Russia today. And so there have been a bunch of questions and kind of commentary for Gera, a few people seconding how wonderful your project is. We have Sophie Lewis on the call today, who is a formidable scholar in the field, and she wants to emphasize Gera's art practice and Sheldon, the association.
Rebecca Sheldon.
Yeah, that's been drawn to your practice.
It's actually amazing book, and my research started from it. Yeah, it's an amazing book, amazing research, and I'm very sad that it's not translated into Russia and all
not
other.
Yet.
Well, it's hard, I think, but we have that, you know, like underground system of zines, and people translate some part by part of Prisiada, like of Donna, or the review, also for Sofiliu's book Full Surrogacy Now. So somehow Russian people are trying to be in time with the modern.
Yeah. Well, your work and presentation does draw so many great parallels. And so a few people, not just Sophie, kind of picked up on that and wanted to really emphasize it. But we do have a question for you. So someone is wondering if you would be able to discuss how queerness was understood in Russia, especially when the anti-sodomy law was repealed in '93. Michel Foucault writes about queer identity formation in his book, The History of Sexuality. He points to the important milestone in the Western history of sexuality when the sodomite became a homosexual. In other words, a sexual act became a sexual identity. And so while Foucault claimed that the homosexual identity started forming in the 19th century in the West, in Russia, when do you think that queerness started to become sexual identity? Is that in the 90s when art and culture created a community among queer people, or is that another time? And so this is probably not just a Gera specific question, but please, anyone who feels they can respond. When did queerness become a sexual identity in Russia? Any takers?
Difficult question, you know.
It is. I forget who asked it. I tried to make it a bit more anonymous when I went into my Word document trying to organize the questions. Some people did ask them to me privately. All the questions have been fantastic. This is one of the best Zoom audiences I've been with. By the way, it's after 1, so I know people probably have to go, but we'll continue for a few more minutes. Does anyone want to weigh in on that, the origins of this kind of queer identity? Or maybe it's a question we could all kind of think on and do some research on after the panel.
You see, when we talk about queerness, I don't associate it personally with queer identity, and I'm not sure that this understanding exists in Russia, actually, because queerness in Russia, Russian language, linguistic reality, term queer is about like being non-straight. On the one hand. On the other hand, actually, not all LGBTQ plus people in Russia at the moment really understand this term. I mean, there are a lot of people who just don't use it. So it's rather new term. And people who do use it, anyway, they maybe use it in general, not only about sexual identity, not only about gender identity, which is very important as well. But like a synonym for or for being non-straight in general?
Mm.
Is it an answer?
That maybe
Does it
queer
work?
identity started to form in 90s when the Soviet Union was broken, because I think in Soviet Union there wasn't even a discussion like about that, like a strong discussion. And with the new medias and artists and with with the foreign music coming, Small Town Boy and all this stuff.
Interesting.
I think speaking of, let's say, that gay and lesbian conference that I showed images of at the beginning, so the conference was presented as a gay and lesbian conference, and that's 91, right? So this is July 91. So even for American activists, in 91, there was the queer was not used, right? Even LGBT was not used. So LGBT would come in the 90s. So in 91, it's still gay and lesbian. And there were I couldn't see any non-binary people. I think, I mean, there were people, questioning for sure, but no people who would identify, let's say, trans, right? At least in that setting.
Yeah, I think you bring up what I think Erica Wolf commented in the chat just now, like, isn't queer a more generational term, and also aligns with non-binary identity. So it seems like you are talking about the same kind of phenomenon.
Right. But speaking of specifically Soviet situation, in 91, there were Soviets who would identify lesbian, and there would be Soviet who would identify homosexual, right? In addition to people who would identify as straight, but would have sex with members of their own sex, right? So it was, the terms that were used. Homosexualist was used, and it was an okay term. I would use it in reference to myself. Let's say in early 90s. Gay was already used. Goluboy was used. Lesbian was used just like that. Lesbian, exactly the same way. So I would say, so this terminology, my understanding, was already in circulation since the 70s, throughout the 70s and 80s. Then after the 90s, no more Goluboy and homosexualist, but then homosexual or gay, right? And then queer came much later.
Yeah. I would say that queer in Russia is a very recent phenomenon, because in the US it proliferated in the late 80s, early 90s. It emerged out of the AIDS crisis, out of Queer Nation, right? But it didn't reach Russia until relatively recently. And I remember first seeing queer in Russian and being so surprised.
I would say that when I was at school in late 19th, there was a gay magazine with name Queer. So I remember this term, I remember this name, I remember this magazine, but it was like a synonym for gay, not for like all the identities.
An American magazine or a Russian one?
A Russian magazine.
A Russian magazine.
Yeah.
I need to do research on this. Should we? It's 1:10.
Ksenia, do you want to ask one question, which I think will probably encompass a few other questions that come in? I apologize to anyone whose question we didn't get to. I've tried my best to kind of condense and organize all your incredible thoughts, but a few people asked about, how you all face elements of danger, what kind of tactics or strategies you'd recommend. And even some people asked, what kind of advice you would have for, somebody trying to develop, similar projects, maybe in Russia or in other places that face a lot of censorship. And so, Ksenia, I think your last question kind of encompasses that. And so maybe you can ask it and sort of get a catch-all for that.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how do you all imagine the Russian queer future with the current reality of Putin's presidency, which with the Constitution Amendment will now continue until 2036?
I think maybe TikTok is gonna help.
Yeah. Well, and Sasha, and you were talking about the digital pride, right? And that made a huge difference.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it will just move into the digital sphere more?
Okay. Yeah, I believe in potential of digital sphere, and I believe in positive change. And also, my theory is that accepting people of different identities is a global process, and it's going on, and it's inevitable. And maybe, like I say, I'm not like economist, but I think maybe it's something profitable in economical sense for like government to recognize like civil partnerships in Russia, and maybe it could work this way because, for example, like 5 years ago, they avoided talking about queers, media avoided talking about queers, but now they do. So we can see that something is happening, and in Russia, these processes, they're going slower than in like Europe countries than the US, but they are going right now, and I'm sure we inevitably will come to civil partnerships, at least for homosexual people, for example. And about trans people, trans communities in Russia, they are so strong. And in last 5 years, they made so much change in terms of changing laws for transgender people, changing medical services, even governmental medical services for transgender people. So I believe in them incredibly. They're very strong.
Yeah, I think with the development of new informational flows like TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, which are not coordinated by Russian government, we have a lot of content by different people and by queer people, whatever it can mean. So I think the society in Russia starts to be more tolerate to it, especially like young generation. I think it's step by step they, see it, and maybe first time they can be like afraid of it, and then maybe they want to try it. So, I think it's, I see the positive vibes from the society, not from the government. And maybe, one day it's going to be broken like USSR system.
I want to add, due to digitalization, people become more informed and people become more visible. We can see much more identities, and I assure that visibility, getting informed, and representation, there are these things that make the revolution, or maybe evolution. So that makes a change.
Well,
and I'm also like in my research, I'm into like, for example, in USA, there are drag shows for kids, and there is a boy, Desmond is amazing on Instagram, and his mother supports him dressing like a drag queen. And as I understand, it's like also kind of an issue. Is it okay for kids to have drag shows or not? And, maybe today it's a question, but in 10 years, each kid will be free to choose its gender, not as an adult, but as a kid already.
Yeah, this is a very complex situation, another comment coming from Erica Wolf about the laws and how, as an educator in Russia, it's really challenging kind of dealing on a person-to-person level with some students when they're, above or below the age of 18, and how strict the laws really are in Russia. And so, I think this is a very rich conversation. I hate to end it, but we did promise to keep it to about an hour. I feel like we've started a lot here. We can surely continue this conversation for hours and hours on end, and everyone's experiences that you've brought to the table. I mean, of course, Zhenya, Sasha, Gera, and Ksenia, thank you so much. You all have brought a wealth and rich expertise to the table today. And then everyone who's been here, I mean, I've been incredibly touched by all the familiar faces and the familiar names, and the people who have been joining us from all over the world and really contributing incredible questions and anecdotes and commentary, very insightful and critical regarding these very sensitive and urgent issues. And so I hope everyone feels like they've been heard. Again, I apologize for not being able to go through all of the questions, but I do think we covered a lot of great ground. This panel has been recorded, and it will be posted to the YouTube page of the Department of Russian and East European Studies, which was posted in the chat. So please, you can save the chat for your own reference. There were a lot of great links posted to the chat, and we'll try to follow up with everyone via email in the coming days, resharing those links with you. But as Sasha just said, I mean, the digital realm, these platforms like Zoom have allowed us all to come together and think together and be together and feel together in this moment of incredible challenge and hardship around the world. So I am so grateful to the four panelists today and their brilliance. I'm grateful also to the Department of Russian and East European Studies at the University of Pennsylvania for hosting this event. And of course, last but not least, really grateful to all of you and for being here today and being present with us. I really, on behalf of everyone, thank you all. So yeah, big love.
Big love. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we wish everyone all the best. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.